I'm back. This is Rachel. Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I haven't uploaded in a long time, which is why I'm smiling awkwardly at the camera and I act like I've never filmed a video before. Today, we're gonna just wrap up all the books that I've read since last time because, granted, my last video was a wrap up, but that was a long time ago. I need to wrap up everything I've read since June, which is like 13 books. Some of it was for school and some of it was for fun. Most of it, I think, was for fun. Well, actually, it might have been more like half and half, but whatever, numbers. So we're going to talk about all my summer reading pretty much and all of my fall class reading. This is probably going to be a hot mess. Don't feel like I remember how to do this at all. I'm not used to talking to a camera. I'm gonna do my best though to speak coherently and all that good stuff. So the first book I read since my last wrap up is called Why Teach in Defense of a Real Education by Mark Edmondson. This was for one of my spring classes. It's about as pretentious as it sounds, I'm not gonna lie. Like his whole thing that he discusses throughout the entire book is that universities are pretty much just providing fun customer service rather than real education. And he's very hung up on this idea of real education. And he explains just about every factor that is now influencing our view of universities and what they're for, except money. And I just think I feel like that makes the whole book a throwaway book. I don't know how it was published for him to just not include that in the conversation when money is probably the biggest factor that everyone now considers in terms of university education, and it's why people demand so many fun things out of it. So I don't know, that was a little strange. There were a few quotes here and there that I kind of vibed with, but it just felt like anything that he started to say that I liked, he kind of contradicts himself later on. He talks about English majors not being taken seriously because English is a major that's considered not a moneymaker. I think I just spit on myself. Did I? Probably. Ew. And he talks about how even though that might be true, it doesn't have the most direct bang for your buck. It's a very enlightening subject. It's a fun subject, and there's still value in those things and how we can enjoy literature and appreciate it. But then for the rest of the book just kind of blabs about how he thinks it's silly that his classes should seem kind of fun or that he shouldn't have a boring personality. And then he talks about how we shouldn't be having fun. And I'm just kind of should we have fun or should we not have fun? Mark, let me know. I don't know what you're trying to tell me here. So a little bit contradictory. One thing that he kind of insists upon is that there really aren't many scholarly enclaves. I feel like I'm doing this a lot already. There's not a lot of scholarly enclaves where people in universities are actually doing scholarly work and really just geeking out about their studies. And I don't know, I just think that he's a grumpy old man because I think that there are scholarly enclaves out there. I feel like it's easy to not be in one in a university. I feel like it is very possible a lot of the times to kind of just do the bare minimum, not necessarily care so much about the fun of the subject that you're studying and instead just focus on the degree. But I think that that's valid because money. But I disagree with him. I feel like there are scholarly enclaves everywhere. I feel like if you yourself want to have fun at university just with the subject, we're not talking about all the extra stuff, but just have fun studying your subject and be curious and want to learn more and have discussion with your professors, they're kind of just waiting for you is what I've noticed. I feel like if you want your university experience to be this scholarly enclave for you, I feel like for the most part you can. I just feel like his views are a little bit overly pessimistic. He's my view of Mark Edmondson is that he's kind of an old man shaking his finger at the sky or his fist, whatever. So I gave this one 2 out of 5 on Goodreads because I said, there were some moments where I'm okay, I get what he's saying. I think that that's an interesting analysis about, how our expectations for universities have changed. I just think it's incredibly short-sighted, incredibly contradictory, and pessimistic. So don't recommend it overall. So the next book I read was The Ancestor by Danielle Trussoni. I think that's how you say her name. This was really different. I don't think it doesn't seem to be very popular. I know that there weren't a lot of Goodreads ratings. I don't actually remember how I discovered this. I don't know if I just ran into it on a list or if I saw it in a YouTube video or what. But basically it's about this woman named Bert, short for Alberta. She has an extremely long name. I don't remember what it is and I'm too lazy to grab the book, but it definitely gave me Mia Thermopolis full name vibes from the Princess Diaries. But Bert is kind of going through a hard time. She's struggling with infertility. She and her husband are getting a divorce. And it's one of those things that it's not because my cat's clawing on something. It's not because they don't love each other or anything. It's just that their fertility issues have put this overall strain on the marriage, and Bert wants to break things off. I don't know. It was a little weird. But anyway, they're getting a divorce. But all of a sudden, Bert finds out that she has inherited a castle in Italy that some distant relative owned. So, like, she's inheriting a full-on castle estate situation. And so she and her husband fly over to Italy to see the castle thing. And I don't know, there's a lot of red flags. The people that are with them as part of the estate are really, really sketchy. I don't know, a lot of the decision making in the first half of the book doesn't make a ton of sense. The marriage is, I have a hard time fully understanding why they want a divorce and why Bert expects certain things of her husband. So like it gets to the point where like they're split up and she's just like, oh, he's never gonna try to find me, or he's never gonna talk to me again or something. And I'm like, okay, based on what I've seen in your husband the first half of this book, I think I know him better than you do, and I think that you're wrong. And I just think that that's really strange because I feel like we don't have that much exposition, but I felt like, I don't know, her expectations from her husband didn't seem to match his character. That was a little distracting. I will say overall the vibe of this was really cool. First half is kind of more of like a horror sort of vibe, but then the second half gets very science fiction-y, which might sound familiar. It might sound like Mexican Gothic. Mexican Gothic is like really, really good though, and I thought that the flow is very nice, even though the each half of the story feels really different. It vibed to me, like the flow was nice and I really loved it, and I thought that it was super well done. The Ancestor kind of misses the mark. I will say I did like the second half. I did like the weirdness that kind of comes about in this castle and like the secrets that she uncovers, but I know that not everyone did. I can't really say anything about it because otherwise it's like a major spoiler. I will just say this, whatever you're reading in those Goodreads review, it's not quite like that. I remember the Goodreads review made me feel like it was gonna be like vampires or something. It's like not. I've never read anything like this before, and that's one good thing about The Ancestor is I've never read anything like it. And I do think that there are some really nice moments in the writing. I think that in the second half of the book, I did start to really care about the other characters that Bert meets and these distant relatives. And in the end, I think I just felt very confused about what I was supposed to get out of this, like what the point was, because I understand the point that the author was trying to get across, kind of, because I know that this was inspired by like one of those genealogy tests, and how she had discovered something about her genealogy that she didn't know before. That was really enlightening. And I know that that was the inspiration for this. And based off of the description I'd seen of the novel, it sounded like it had to do with coping with a family's dark past. And so I almost kind of thought that it was going to go more in the direction of dealing with generational trauma, but it ended up being like really different from that. And I was kind of confused as to like what I was supposed to get out of it. So I gave it like a 3 out of 5 in Goodreads. Sometimes it felt like towards the end, it kind of felt like more of a 3.5. I don't know. It was fine. So horror vibes, science fiction vibes, uniqueness, but just I had problems with the execution. The next one I read was really good, The Dark Forest by Cixin Liu. This is the second book in the Remembrance. Sunny! Oh my goodness! He's like looking out the window at leaves. Anyway, this is the second book in the Remembrance of Earth Past trilogy. I read The Three-Body Problem last year. I thought it was so good. And I feel like The Dark Forest, I don't think I prefer it over The Three-Body Problem, but I will say that Cixin Liu got technically better. I felt like there was a lot more literary techniques being employed, like image patterns and symbolism. The pacing was a lot better. I feel like he improved on a lot of fronts. At least, also another thing is the main character actually feels like a real person. Wang Mao in the first one, I didn't really like him as a character. I like Luo Ji better. And I was excited to see Da Shi from the first one because like he was my favorite character at the time. So in the first book, it's about first contact with aliens and kind of discovering, you know, what Trisolaris is and, you know, why these this kind of alien race is going to try to come to Earth. And now in the Dark Force, we're like, humanity knows that it's coming and now we have to deal with it. And I thought that his kind of perspective on what could possibly happen and how people could react was so wild and interesting. Basically, they start this wall facer project where a few people are chosen to basically plan out a strategy to fight Trisolaris when they come to Earth. But like, they can't say anything specific to anyone. Like, it's a secret. It's only in their mind do they know exactly what their orders are going to look like in the future or what they will do at the last second. So super wild, super psychological. I think overall my favorite thing about Cixin Liu's books are just these gorgeous and epic science fiction images. Like, I feel like his imagery is so beautiful. I think that the reflectiveness is super effective. I think that his ideas are unique, and I think that the ideas that he's exploring are just in general just really fun to read about. The only thing is with these books, and the reason why I give this like a 4 out of 5 instead of a full 5 out of 5, is it's still very idea driven. If you're into the ideas that he's exploring, that's like the only way you're gonna enjoy these books. But with the Dark Forest, I just found that there were some days I didn't have the brain capacity and it was like a little bit slower to get through. But these are incredibly good books. The Dark Force was a great sequel. I will definitely be reading Death's End at some point, but I always have to, this is a series where I definitely have to wait for the right moment, because if I'm too tired, if I'm scatterbrained, I can't read these. Like, just period. So then this is the part in the summertime in July when I got COVID. And I wanted to read some shorter books because I didn't feel very good. And when I don't feel good, I have a hard time focusing on anything, even if it's things that I enjoy. So I finally read Comfort Me with Apples by, who's the author? Catherine M. Valente? Not sure. And this is really hard because it's so tiny. It's like 100 some pages, like it's under 120 pages. And it's one of those things where like there's it's all about the twist, and I can't tell you what it is. So there's the scenario that we're rolling with is this girl Sophie, and her life, according to her, is just very perfect. She's got this beautiful house, she's got this gorgeous husband, nice neighbors, and she's in this gorgeous estate, kind of gated community. And you start to see these little red flags where it's like, Sophie, I don't think that's as perfect as you think it is. And then it just kind of gets weirder and weirder and weirder and weirder. And like I said, I can't really tell you anything about it, but it's super weird. I love books that are weird. I will say, out of everything I've seen it compared to, I think the closest would be the film Mother from Darren Aronofsky. I've never actually watched Mother because I could just tell it was going to be a little too triggering for me, but I know of it. I've read like the synopsis and whatnot because I respect Darren Aronofsky's work. I definitely think it's similar. I do think it's less traumatizing than Mother though. So if Mother was like, if I say that it's comparable to that movie and all you're thinking about is that baby scene, it's not like that. There's trauma, but there's not like that level of trauma, okay? But yeah, I gave this one actually a 5 out of 5. It's horror, it's unsettling, it's weird, it's good stuff. And now we're gonna take a complete 180 because after I read that 5 out of 5 star book, besties, the time has come. I've not had to rant about how much I hated a book on this channel yet because I've not read anything that I really, really, really disliked. But the day has come. I read The Enlightenment Project by LYNN Hightower, also when I had COVID for something quick. Besties, this was not it. The concept is so intriguing. It's about exorcisms, but the main character who had survived an exorcism in the past is a brain surgeon, and like he's trying to look at what the brain does when someone's possessed, when they're doing an exorcism, when they're undergoing one. And I was like, okay, sis, pop off, because that sounds like such a cool idea. And I thought that there was so much potential for this book to be so smart. I didn't even question the fact that like nobody has read this book, and that's why I've not left my mean review on Goodreads, because there's literally only like 40 reviews. I didn't even care like that it wasn't popular, and I usually don't. I figured, that doesn't matter. It could still be a really great book. This is probably a hidden gem. There's probably going to be a lot of really cool links to psychology and stuff like that. It's going to be like well researched. But in reality, this woman memorized like 2 parts of the brain and like ran with it. Like that's the extent of like the science. In this book, our brain surgeon who had not recently, but in the past had an exorcism, is assisting the priest that gave him his exorcism. And he has started this thing called the Enlightenment Project on his own. The priest doesn't approve of this. That basically has people reach like a spiritual state, which kind of... this cat. Which helps them with like a variety of like problems. That part's like a little bit fuzzy in my brain. But I feel like it usually like helps people with like mental illnesses and stuff. The priest was not really into it, but this guy has been doing it. And this particular priest has a really rough possession case that he needs the surgeon's opinion on, because sometimes he consults him, because even though this priest works with people like this, it's like he kind of treats it like it takes one to know one. So like he's asking someone that has actually been like under a demonic possession if other people are possessed. And so you kind of see them team up to look at this one particular man's case. They do like an MRI during the exorcism and stuff like that. But it just wasn't good. Like I said, the science wasn't as cool as it could have been. The writing was not wonderful. There's typos, there's just awkwardness. And the thing that killed me the most is how often the characters say each other's names. They say it all the time. It drove me nuts. I will say also the pacing got really messed up in the second half, and we just kind of got these new conflicts coming in, or new layers that just felt a little bit random to me. And then they start trying to do this like angel stuff at the end. I don't know, man. It was corny to me. I did not like this book. I thought it was a big mess. I get a 1 out of 5 on Goodreads. One thing I've noticed is, because this author generally writes like mystery thrillers, I believe, I feel like I don't read those that much. And I feel like the ones that I would like are the ones that have more of a horror bend to it, like this one and like The Burning Girls. But I haven't liked any of them. So I just feel like when thriller writers try to write horror, they just don't know what they're doing, and it's not good. But if you have any recommendations of like a mystery thriller that bend towards horror, let me know, because I still want to try. But I'm dying to find one that's like actually really good, in my opinion. So then we're gonna take another 180, because then I read another 5 out of 5. And this one was actually nonfiction. As I knew him, my dad read Serling by Anne Serling. And I talked about this when I hauled this book. I love Rod Serling so much. If you don't know, he is the man that hosted the original Twilight Zone. That show was his idea. He also had Night Gallery. He wrote a whole bunch of stuff, honestly. And based on what I knew about him, I know that he has like an interesting life, and so I was willing to read like a memoir from his daughter's point of view about like life growing up with him and stuff like that, because like his life's actually interesting. I don't usually like memoirs, but I feel like this just hit the mark in every single way. This was so wonderful. First of all, Anne Serling is a great writer. Like, even though it's a memoir, the writing never at any moment felt dry to me. That's a problem I've had with memoirs in the past. I also felt like she did a great job knowing what details to include. So Rod Serling fought in World War II, and she does include some of his letters from that time. And I feel like it would have been so easy, because sometimes people do this where like they just publish all of the letters. That would have bored me to tears, though. You know what I mean? Like, she gives us the highlights and some of the interesting things that he was writing about, or like what a typical letter looked like. You know, how he was always like requesting like cookies and stuff from his family to send him down there. So she talks about, you know, a little bit about his life growing up. Based off her research, she interviews other people that knew him. She talks about his time in the war and how he was so traumatized by it with his PTSD. Talks about, obviously, his amazing writing career and how writing was such an important outlet for him. She talks about what a family man he was, and I think that that's what really gets me, is how rich and vivid her writing is about like her childhood and all of these happy memories around her dad. I thought that it was so beautiful, and I think it's so refreshing to see like such a normal family. That being said, like, I know that Rod Serling passed away at some point, right? So, like, I know that she's gonna address his death, and I was kind of, like, dreading that, because, like, it's almost like if you already know the ending of, like, a movie where someone dies, but this is real life. She talks about dealing with her father's death and how emotional that made her, and how she really struggled for years to deal with it. And her writing in those moments are also super poignant. I think that she really writes emotion well. She writes her memories clearly so we could see them. She's just really good. I mean, like father, like daughter, because I have read Twilight Zone scripts as well. Like, I've not just like watched the show, like I've actually like read some of the scripts, and they're so well written. But I thought that it was just a really beautiful tribute. I'm so happy that I read this. It was so, so sweet. So, great memoir. And then I read a couple short ones when I was on airplanes going to Cape Town to see my fiance. I decided to just read short books. A lot of people like longer books for long haul flights, but my attention span is not great on planes. So I think for me, I just wanted to I wanted to load up my Kindle with some short ebooks that I could actually like whip through pretty quickly, because then that would actually motivate me to finish them. So the first one I read was, it seems like it's really highly recommended by most people, but it just didn't do a whole lot for me. Keep Going, 10 Ways to Stay Creative in Good Times and Bad by Austin Kleon. And this guy's an artist, and so in addition to like having, obviously, like, it's a book, there's words, but there's also, you know, his illustrations to illustrate his points. And it's pretty much what you see is what you get. Like, it's about how to stay creative no matter what's going on in your life. And I just felt like, for me, it wasn't anything I didn't know for the most part. It kind of felt like a pep talk, and I'm starting to realize that I don't really like pep talk type books. So I didn't really care for it. The one piece of advice, though, that I will share that really resonated with me, he talked about how it can get to a point when, you know, you're creating your art or you're writing or whatever, that you put this pressure on yourself to make something perfect, so there's monetary value to it. That's me. I do that. So he talks about how sometimes we still need to we need to play, we need to experiment, we just need to write something just for the fun of it, we need to draw something for the fun of it, we don't need to worry about if it's good enough, if it's publishable or something like that. And I feel like that's something that I've really lost over the years, and that's something that I'm going to try to keep in mind. So I did get that out of it. That was nice. Then I also read A House at the Bottom of the Lake by Josh Malerman. Never read anything by this author. The Goodreads rating for this one is actually quite low. It's about a 3.2 or something like that. But a couple of my favorite YouTubers really liked it, and based off their descriptions, I thought that I would like it too. It's kind of like a young adult sort of vibe, or it's supposed to be. We'll get to that later. It's about these two teenagers who start dating. They're kind of like falling in love over the summer, and they discover, you know, in this lake that there is a house at the bottom of it, and everything is like strangely intact. It kind of defies gravity how everything's in its place. It's supposed to be really spooky, and in the synopsis, it straight up just tells you that the more that they kind of fixate on this house and explore this house, the more in love they are. And that's kind of like the metaphor, which I thought was going to be really cool. But like, that's the extent of the metaphor. Like, the more they're in love, the more creepy the house gets. And like, that's it. And I just wanted something more than that. I just feel like the whole message was that love is scary, I guess. But yeah, I feel like that didn't do anything for me. I also didn't really think that the writing was any good. It was a lot of repeated words and phrases. The teenagers don't talk like teenagers at all, like at all. I know sometimes people complain about that with John Green's books. I actually disagree with that. I think that he captures the teenage dialect well. I think that people just don't accept that teenagers can have deep conversations, and that's why they don't like how John Green writes teenagers. But for this one, it's the dialect. It's just the way that they talk feels awkward, kind of like the rest of the writing. It didn't work for me. I also didn't feel like the romance was very romancy. I have no idea why these two kids like each other. No clue. So I couldn't really feel anything for it the whole time. I think I understand the ending. Or at least I have my interpretation of it. So, I mean, I like an ambiguous ending. It's just, it still didn't have quite enough meaning for me. And it wasn't really scary enough. It wasn't romancy enough. It wasn't meaningful enough. So I give it like 2 out of 5 because I did still like the concept. And I feel like he could build suspense at certain points. But like, that's it. So then I read a lot of books for school. I got to take a colonial, post-colonial British literature class. And so the first one we read was a reread for me, Wide Sargasso Sea by Jean Reese. I will never get over how beautiful this book is. I love it so much. So if you've read Jane Eyre, Wide Sargasso Sea is about Bertha. And it's supposed to humanize her because where she is from, she's a white Creole. And the author of Wide Sargasso Sea is as well. And so if you kind of read about, you know, how people in England viewed the English people in the colonies, even the white people, it kind of sheds like this whole new light on how in Jane Eyre, Bertha is like the only character not from England, and she's pretty much depicted like a monster. So there's obviously a lot that you can do with that. And so Jean Reese really humanizes Bertha and talks about like her childhood growing up and how she's never really felt like she belonged anywhere because she doesn't really belong in the Dominican Republic and she doesn't really belong in England. So she's just this white girl in the Dominican trying to, you know, survive amid a lot of different racial tensions and things that she was just kind of born into. But I think the thing above all in this book that I love the most is Jean Reese's writing style. Like there's a moment in the writing, it's so good. Like, you took this place that I love and made it into a place that I hate. And every time I get to that part, I'm like, oh, girl, yes. Then we got to read Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. This is a reread. I do not like this book. I think I actually liked it less the second time. I think that the first time I had such a hard time focusing and getting through it that I just thought that maybe I was stupid. No, it's really written in a way that's not that good. It's kind of confusing. And like, I remember there's one time I had to read a paragraph 5 times before I realized that they were trying to say that there was an elephant in the distance, because they never say that there's an elephant in the distance. So it's kind of written like that. Basically, the premise of this book, it's written, you know, based off of like Belgium's conquest of the Congo, which was obviously really gruesome and violent and horrific. Basically, it's about this merchant that's walking around being like, Africa's scary. And then that's it. So like, it's generally, it's considered a racist text, period. And so it tends to be studied, I feel like, to show how texts from that time or at any point in history are really influenced by a lot of problematic viewpoints. So I get why we read it. but it wasn't fun and I don't like it. Then we read Nervous Conditions. The author's name is escaping me, but I'm going to put the book cover up there. And I think the reason why it's escaping me is because I've never been confident in how to pronounce it. But Nervous Conditions was actually pretty good. I liked this one. So this is about this girl, Tambu, who lives in Zimbabwe. And Zimbabwe was colonized by England. And she has this opportunity to get like a very English education because her uncle was educated in England, and she's pretty much just trying to find her place in a world where she's kind of forced to choose between her culture from her home in Zimbabwe versus English culture, which is really complicated because obviously there's a lot of gorgeous things about her home culture, but then she likes English culture because that's provided her with like this education that she enjoys and with a lot of like modern tools that make her life easier. So she's very torn in that way a lot. She has a cousin who has an eating disorder. She also has to deal with a lot of the misogyny in Zimbabwe. So she's trying to figure out who she is, but she's constantly being torn in two. So that sounds interesting to you. I do recommend it. I think it's written in a really nice way. I don't really have a ton else to say about it. It's obviously like, this is not an experience that I relate to as a white woman in the United States. So this was not a mirror, this was a window, and it's a very interesting window, and it's such a lovely piece of art in general. So I do recommend Nervous Conditions. I gave it 4 out of 5 on Goodreads. Then we get to read A Passage to India, which I didn't mind. That's by E.M. Forster, and basically it's about white people trying to be friends with Indians in India. But it's during colonization, so it's really awkward. So even in situations where you have both parties wanting to be friends, the British Empire is kind of this dark cloud over everything, and it makes it pretty much impossible to have normal friendships between races there, because there's always going to be this line of division. That's kind of what the novel's arguing. So like until the British Empire just leaves India, Indians and the English will probably never really be able to bond well. There were things I liked about those, things I didn't like about it. It's definitely a product of the time. I did like a lot of the writing. There were some passages that I highlighted that I thought were kind of nice. I do like that it explores friendship. I thought that was fun and complicated, because of the time and because of what the characters are going through. It's interesting to see some of the kind of English people being reduced to caricatures, and how like some of them are just really unbearable. Not really your main characters, but some of them are just horribly unbearable, and everyone is like kind of misogynistic, which doesn't really get super addressed, which I'm not really sure what E.M. Forster would have thought about, because there is a instance of assault in this book, and or possible assault. It's complicated, and the girl that happened to, people are not really, it's almost like they're sympathizing more with her fiance than her. That was kind of awkward too. So like, it's one of those books where I feel like certain things like that are really gonna bother people, but like E.M. Forster doesn't seem to approve of those characters. Like, they're kind of ridiculous anyway. Like, they're depicted as being very ridiculous throughout most of the novel. There's only like a few sets of like a few main characters that kind of feel like real people, and he's just kind of exposing the limitations in even those who want to be, have friendships across cultures were running into problems at that time. So it was interesting. Second half, I got a little bit bored. I do like the incorporation of spirituality. So the different parts are, what are the mosque, caves, and temple. And so there's definitely incorporation of ideas from Islam and Hinduism in there as well, since those were the dominating religions in India. So I gave it a 2 out of 5. I just got a little bit bored with it, and it's not something that I could super vibe with, but it was fine. So the last one I read, this is the last one to wrap up, and it's the last one for my class, was Untouchable by Mulk Rajanand. This one was very interesting. I've not read much Indian literature. This one is about someone from the untouchable class. So if you're not super familiar with social issues in India of the past, they had a very strict caste system, and if you were untouchable, you were like so low that you're not even in the caste system anymore. And at that time, no one was really, like, people didn't care about untouchables that much, and Gandhi was trying to get people to treat them better, and he's the most famous figure. There were other people that were trying to advocate for untouchables and in different ways. But we didn't really have any literature following an untouchable person. So this book follows this one guy who's in that class, he's in that caste, and he's a street sweeper, and he cleans toilets all day, and people treat him like garbage because people believed that if you touched these people, if you accidentally bumped into them, then you were diseased, and like he stands too close to I think a temple. It was either a temple or a mosque. I don't really remember which religion it was at the time. I don't think it didn't matter as much as like what they did to him mattered. Basically, they all just start like freaking out because he's too close, and now they're gonna have to purify the whole place. Like, it shows how dehumanized they were. So it's not a fun read, but you know, it's a window into someone's misery. And then there's also, you know, discussion, you know, of whether or not this author could even accurately depict life for someone in this class when that's not the class that he was in. He was part of the warrior caste, and that's something we talked about in the class too. So yeah, these are the 13 books I read recently. Hopefully, now that I'm not doing work and grad school at the same time for a little bit, I have a little bit of a break before my next class. Hopefully I could actually like make videos again. That would be cool. Maybe I could even write for fun. Isn't that a wild idea? But yeah, let me know what you guys have been reading. And I'll see you next time.